until one woman's eyes changed his destiny forever. The cowboy wanted Solitude. The bullet missed his head by 3 inches and splintered the wooden post behind him. Jake Harrison threw himself sideways off his horse, rolling in the dust as 2 more shots rang out across the canyon. He had been riding alone for 6 months, avoiding every town and every face, but someone had found him anyway. His hand reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle, but the horse bolted, leaving him exposed on the rocky ground. The shooter was above him somewhere in the cliffs, and the sun was directly in his eyes. Jake crawled behind a boulder as another shot kicked up dirt near his boots. This was not how he planned to die, not after everything he had survived. He pulled his revolver and counted the seconds between shots. 5 seconds. The shooter was using a bolt-action rifle. That gave Jake a narrow window. When the next shot came, he sprinted 20 yards to a larger rock formation, feeling the heat of the bullet pass his shoulder. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands stayed steady. "I know who you are," a voice called from above. It was a man's voice, rough and angry. "You think you can just disappear? You think we'd forget?" Jake said nothing. He had learned long ago that talking got you killed. He scanned the cliff face and saw a flash of metal in the sunlight. The shooter was positioned behind a ledge about 40 feet up. "Bad angle for either of them. You killed my brother in Kansas," the voice shouted. "Left him bleeding in the street like a dog." Jake's jaw tightened. Kansas. That had been different. That had been self-defense witnessed by a dozen people. But the dead man's family would not care about details. Revenge had a way of simplifying everything. He waited, controlling his breathing. The shooter would have to move eventually, and when he did, Jake would be ready. Minutes passed. The sun beat down on the rocks and sweat ran into Jake's eyes. Then he heard it, the scrape of boots on stone. The shooter was repositioning, trying to get a better angle. Jake moved fast, circling around the rock formation and finding a narrow path that led upward. He climbed quickly, ignoring the loose stones under his feet. When he reached a higher position, he saw the man clearly for the first time. Young, maybe 25, with a face twisted by grief and rage, the young man turned and their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then the man raised his rifle, and Jake fired first. The shot echoed across the canyon, and the man stumbled backward, dropping his weapon. He did not fall off the cliff, but he went down on one knee, clutching his shoulder. Jake approached carefully, keeping his gun aimed. The man looked up at him with hatred burning in his eyes, but also something else. Fear, pain. The same look his brother probably had in those final moments. "I did not want to kill him," Jake said quietly. "Drew first." "Liar," the man spat. Jake looked at the wounded shoulder. The bullet had gone through clean. The man would survive if he got help soon. Jake could leave him here, let him bleed out slowly, or he could do the decent thing. He holstered his gun and pulled out a bandana. "Hold still," he said. The man tried to fight him off, but he was too weak. Jake wrapped the wound tightly, stopping the worst of the bleeding. Then he stood and looked down at him. "Town is 8 miles east. You can make it if you start now." He turned and walked away, sliding back down the rocky slope. His horse had not gone far, just around the bend where the shooting had stopped. Jake caught the reins and mounted up, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. He rode hard for an hour, putting distance between himself and the wounded man, between himself and another ghost to add to his collection. By evening, he reached a small stream and made camp under a cluster of cottonwood trees. He built no fire. The stars came out cold and bright above him, and he lay on his back staring at them, thinking about the man he had shot, about all the men he had shot, about the life he had left behind. He wanted solitude. He wanted silence. He wanted to disappear so completely that his own name would mean nothing anymore. But the past kept finding him, kept dragging him back into violence he thought he had escaped. Tomorrow he would ride further west, deeper into the wilderness where no one knew his face. He would find some forgotten valley where he could live out his days alone, where the only sounds would be wind and water and the occasional cry of a hawk. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But plans, Jake knew, had a way of falling apart. The next morning brought rain, cold and steady, turning the trail into mud. Jake rode with his hat pulled low, water running off the brim in streams. He followed a ridgeline north, avoiding the main roads, staying to the wild country where few people traveled. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy. He came upon a ranch just before sunset. It was a small operation, maybe 100 acres, with a weathered house and a barn that leaned slightly to one side. Smoke rose from the chimney, and he could see horses in the corral. Jake almost rode past it, but his supplies were running low, and he needed grain for his horse. He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. A dog started barking, and a moment later, a man stepped out onto the porch with a shotgun cradled in his arms. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a cautious expression. "Help you?" the man called. "Looking to buy some grain," Jake said, "and maybe some jerky if you have it." The man studied him for a long moment, taking in the trail-worn clothes, the tied-down holster, the hard look in Jake's eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "Got grain. No jerky, but my daughter's cooking stew. You can have a bowl if you want."
Jake hesitated.
He had avoided human contact for months, and the idea of sitting at a table with strangers made his skin crawl. But the smell of cooking food drifted from the house, and his stomach reminded him that he had been eating nothing but dried beef and stale biscuits for weeks. "Appreciated," he said. He dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. The man lowered the shotgun but did not put it away. Smart. Jake would have done the same. "Name's George," the man said. "George Parker. Jake." He did not offer a last name, and George did not ask for one. They went inside, and the warmth hit Jake like a wave. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and lanterns burned on the walls, casting everything in soft yellow light. At the stove stood a woman, stirring a large pot. She turned when they entered, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a braid and eyes the color of summer grass. There was strength in her face, the kind that came from years of hard work and harder choices. When she looked at him, those eyes seemed to see straight through his carefully built walls. "This is my daughter Claire," George said. "Claire, we got a visitor for supper." "Welcome," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Have a seat." Jake removed his hat and sat at the rough wooden table. George set the shotgun in the corner but stayed standing, watching. Claire ladled stew into 3 bowls and brought them over with a plate of cornbread. The food was simple but good, and Jake ate slowly, aware of their eyes on him. "You riding through or looking for work?" George asked. "Riding through," Jake said. "Where are you headed?" "West." George nodded, accepting the vague answer. "A lot of empty country out west. Easy to get lost." "That is the idea," Jake said quietly. Claire set down her spoon and looked at him directly. "You running from something or toward something?" The question caught him off guard. Most people had the sense not to pry. He met her gaze and saw no judgment there, only curiosity. "Away from something," he said honestly. "And you think you can outrun it?" "I am going to try." She smiled then. Just a small curve of her lips, but it changed her whole face. "I tried that once. Did not work." "What happened?" "I came back. Faced it. Turned out it was not as bad as I thought." Jake looked down at his bowl. "Some things are exactly as bad as you think." They finished the meal in silence. When Jake pulled out money to pay for the grain and the food, George waved him off. "Keep it. You look like you need it more than we do." Jake wanted to argue, but he could see that George meant it. He nodded his thanks and stood to leave. Claire followed him out to the porch while George went to the barn to get the grain. Jake froze, his hand on the porch railing. "How do you know?" "Because innocent men do not look the way you do. Guilty men do not run. You are somewhere in between." He turned to face her. In the fading light, her green eyes seemed to glow. "You do not know anything about me. I know you are tired. I know you are looking for peace, but going about it all wrong. Solitude is not the same as peace. It is close enough." She stepped closer, and he caught the scent of wood smoke and sage in her hair. "Is it? Because from where I stand, you look like the loneliest man I have ever seen." The words hit harder than any bullet. Jake felt something crack inside him, some carefully maintained wall he had built over years of running. He wanted to argue, to push her away with cold words and a hard look, but he could not, 'cause she was right. George returned with a sack of grain, and the moment broke. Jake tied the sack to his saddle and mounted up. He tipped his hat to both of them and turned his horse toward the gate. "There is a line shack about 10 miles north," Claire called after him, "on the west side of Blue Ridge. It is empty this time of year. Roof does not leak." He looked back at her, surprised. "Why tell me that?" "Because everyone needs a place to rest sometimes. Even men who think they want to be alone." Jake rode out without answering, but he thought about her words all through the darkening evening. He thought about her eyes, the way they seemed to see past all his defenses. He thought about the warmth of that kitchen, the simple kindness of a meal shared. Things he had convinced himself he did not need. He found the line shack right where she said it would be, a small log structure tucked into a grove of pine trees. Inside it was dusty but dry, with a bunk and a stove and a stack of firewood. He unsaddled his horse and built a small fire, then sat on the bunk staring at the flames. For the first time in months he allowed himself to wonder if he was wrong, if maybe running was not the answer. If maybe there was another way to live with the weight of what he had done and what had been done to him. But old habits died hard, and by morning he had convinced himself to keep moving. He saddled up at dawn and rode north, following the ridge line into higher country. The land grew rougher, more remote. Exactly what he wanted. Exactly what he told himself he needed. 3 days later, he was ambushed again. This time it was not a lone gunman, but 4 men, and they came at him from 2 directions on a narrow trail with cliffs on both sides. Jake saw them just in time, saw the sunlight flash on gun barrels, and threw himself off his horse as the first volley of shots rang out. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding in his shoulder where he landed on a rock. His horse screamed and went down, blood pouring from its neck. Jake crawled to the dying animal and pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard as bullets hammered the ground around him. The horse's body provided cover, but it would not last long. 4 against 1, and they had the high ground. Jake fired twice at the men on the left cliff, forcing them back behind rocks, then swung around and shot at the 2 on the right. One of them cried out and disappeared from view. "Give it up, Harrison," one of them yelled. "You are done." That meant this was not random. These were not bandits looking for easy money. These were hunters, and he was the prey. Jake checked his ammunition. 12 rounds in the rifle, 6 in his revolver, against 3 men, maybe 4 if the one he hit was still in the fight. Not good odds. He waited, watching for movement. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. His shoulder throbbed where he had landed, and he could feel blood seeping through his shirt. Not from a bullet wound, just torn skin from the rocks. But it weakened him nonetheless. An hour passed, then 2. The men were patient, content to wait him out. Bad water up there in the rocks. Jake had nothing but what was in his canteen, and that was nearly empty. By nightfall, he would be desperate. They knew it. He had to move while he still had strength. The question was where and when. The trail behind him led back the way he came, but it was exposed for 100 yards. Forward was blocked by the ambush. That left up, and climbing while being shot at was a good way to die. But staying was a certain death, just slower. Jake took a deep breath and made his decision. He would go up, but not where they expected. There was a crack in the cliff face to his right, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. If he could reach it, he might be able to climb above them and get away. He waited for a cloud to pass over the sun, dimming the light just slightly. Then he moved, sprinting from behind the dead horse toward the cliff face. Bullets chewed up the ground at his heels, but he did not slow down. He hit the crack in the rock and started climbing, using every handhold he could find. His shoulders screamed in protest, but he ignored it. Below him, men were shouting, repositioning to get a clear shot. A bullet sparked off the rock near his hand, and stone chips cut his face. He kept climbing, pulling himself higher, his muscles burning with the effort. He reached a narrow ledge 15 feet up and rolled onto it just as a bullet struck where his head had been a second before. Breathing hard, he looked down and saw 2 of the men climbing after him. The others were working their way around, trying to cut off his escape. Jake leveled his rifle and fired. The lead climber fell with a scream, tumbling down the cliff face. The second man froze, then started backing down quickly. Jake used the moment to keep climbing, finding another crack that led upward. His hands were bleeding now, torn on the sharp rock, but he could not stop. Up and up, until finally he pulled himself over the top of the cliff and lay gasping on flat ground. He could hear the men below, arguing about whether to follow. Jake did not wait to find out. He got to his feet and ran, stumbling across the rocky terrain, putting distance between himself and the ambush. When he was sure they were not following, he slowed to a walk, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. He had lost his horse, most of his supplies, and nearly his life. Again. And for what? For the privilege of dying alone in the wilderness? Claire's words came back to him, sharp and clear. "You look like the loneliest man I have ever seen." Maybe she was right. Maybe solitude was not the answer. Maybe running would never be enough because the thing he was running from was inside him, and you could not outrun yourself no matter how far you rode. As the sun set, Jake found himself turning around, heading back the way he had come. Back toward that ranch, with the leaning barn and the kitchen full of warm light. Back toward green eyes that saw through him. Back toward something he could not quite name but desperately needed. It took him 4 days to walk back to the Parker Ranch. 4 days of sleeping rough, eating berries and roots, nursing his injured shoulder and cut hands. 4 days to convince himself he was not making a terrible mistake. When he finally stumbled up to the ranch house, it was George who saw him first. The old man was mending fence near the road, and his eyes widened when he recognized Jake. "What in blazes happened to you?" "Ambush. Lost my horse." George set down his tools and came closer, looking at Jake's torn clothes and bloody hands. "You need a doctor?" "I need a place to stay," Jake said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Just for a while. I can work. I'm good with horses, good with cattle. I can fix things. I will earn my keep." George studied him for a long moment. "This about my daughter?" Jake met his eyes. "Partly. But mostly it is about me, about trying something different." "Different how? Not running anymore?" George nodded slowly, then surprised Jake by extending his hand. "All right. We can always use help. But I will tell you straight, you hurt Claire in any way, and you will wish those men in the canyon had killed you." "Understood." They shook hands, and George led him toward the house. Claire was in the garden, pulling weeds from between rows of vegetables. When she looked up and saw Jake, she went very still. Then she stood and walked over, her eyes taking in his condition. "You came back," she said. "I did." "Why?" Jake looked at her, at the questions in her green eyes, and decided to tell her the truth. "Because you were right. Solitude is not peace, and I am tired of being lonely." A slow smile spread across her face, and Jake felt something loosen in his chest, some knot he had been carrying for years. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was not peace, not completely, but it was a beginning. A chance. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Claire wiped her hands on her apron and gestured toward the house. "Well then, come inside. You look like you could use a meal and a bath, and probably in that order." Jake followed her, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something other than the weight of the past. He felt possibility. He felt hope. And though he did not know it yet, he felt the first stirrings of something that might, in time, become love. The first week on the Parker Ranch nearly killed him. Not from violence or danger, but from the simple fact that his body had forgotten what honest work felt like. George had him up before dawn every morning, mucking stalls, mending fence, breaking ice on the water troughs. The cold bit through his jacket, and his hands, still healing from the climb, split open again on the rough tools. But Jake did not complain. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. Besides, there was something satisfying about physical labor, about seeing the results of your work at the end of each day. A fixed fence, a clean barn, horses fed and watered. Simple things, but real. Claire watched him from a distance that first week, saying little but missing nothing. He could feel her eyes on him when he worked, assessing, measuring, deciding if he would stay or run again when things got hard. He was determined to prove that those days were behind him. On the 8th day, she brought him coffee while he was repairing the barn door. The hinges had rusted through, and he was fitting new ones, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. "You are good at this," she said, handing him the cup. "I have done it before. Long time ago." "Where?" Jake took a sip of the coffee, grateful for the warmth. "My father had a ranch in Texas. Before the war. Before everything went wrong." "What happened?" He set down his tools and looked at her. "The things that always happen. Drought. Debt. Men with guns who decided they wanted our land more than we did. My father fought them. They killed him for it. My mother died 6 months later. Some say from grief, but I think it was from giving up." "How old were you?" 17. Claire leaned against the barn wall, her arms crossed against the cold. "And after that I learned to use a gun. Got good at it. Too good. Started hiring out to whoever would pay. Cattle drives, range wars, guarding payrolls. Told myself it was just survival, but somewhere along the way it became something else." "What?" "A way to feel something other than empty. Every fight, every close call, it made me feel alive. Until one day I realized I had become the same kind of man who killed my father. That is when I started running." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "How many men have you killed?" Jake had known the question would come eventually, but it still hit hard. 14 that I know of. Maybe more in range wars where you could not tell who shot who. All but 2 were in fair fights. The 2 that were not were men trying to backshoot me. I do not lose sleep over those. And the others? I lose plenty of sleep over them. My husband was killed 4 years ago, thrown from a horse during a storm, broke his neck. He was dead before I could reach him. Jake had not known she was a widow. It explains some things, like why she was here working her father's ranch instead of raising children in a house of her own. I am sorry, he said. Me too. He was a good man. Kind, gentle, everything I thought I wanted. She paused, looking out at the mountains in the distance. But you know what I learned after he died? You do not always want what you think you want. Sometimes you need something different. Something stronger. Something that understands the darkness because it has been there too. Their eyes met, and Jake felt that same shift in his chest he had felt the first night. Like something was changing, some door opening that had been locked for years. Is that what you think you need? He asked quietly. I do not know yet. But I am willing to find out. She pushed off the wall and walked away, leaving him standing there with his coffee growing cold in his hands. Jake watched her go, feeling something he had not felt in years. Not just hope, but want. The desire for something beyond mere survival. The possibility of building instead of running. Of staying instead of leaving. That night, George called him into the house after supper. Claire had gone to bed, and the 2 men sat by the fire with glasses of whiskey. George poured generous measures and handed one to Jake. She told me about your conversation this morning, George said. Figured she might. You need to understand something about my daughter. She is stronger than she looks, tougher too. But she has already buried one man she loved. I will not let her bury another because he could not leave his past behind. Jake stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. I cannot change what I have done. I am not asking you to. I am asking if you can live with it. If you can build something new without the old pulling you back down. I do not know, Jake admitted. But I am trying, George nodded. That is all any of us can do. Try. He raised his glass. 2 trying. They drank, and the whiskey burned going down, warming Jake from the inside. When he went to bed in the small room off the barn that George had given him, he slept without dreaming for the first time in months. The weeks passed and winter settled in hard. Snow fell heavy and thick, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Jake and George worked long hours, keeping the animals fed and the paths clear. Claire cooked and managed the house, but she also worked alongside them when needed, proving she was every bit as tough as her father claimed. Jake found himself watching her more and more. The way she moved with efficient grace, the way she laughed at George's bad jokes. The way she looked at Jake when she thought he was not paying attention, with an expression he could not quite read but that made his heart beat faster. One evening in late December, a blizzard trapped them all inside for 3 days. George played cards and told stories of his younger days. Claire mended clothes and read by lamplight. Jake carved pieces of wood into small figures, a habit from childhood he had nearly forgotten. On the second night, Claire sat beside him and watched his hands work. What are you making?
A horse.
For you. If you want it. Why a horse? I see how you are with them in the barn, how you talk to them like they understand every word. She smiled. Maybe they do. Animals know things people do not. Like what? Like who can be trusted, who is safe, who is dangerous. She paused. Your horse trusted you. I saw it in how he responded to you that first night. Animals do not trust bad men. I am not sure that is true. I am. She reached out and touched his hand, stopping his carving. You are not the man you think you are, Jake. You are not the sum of your worst moments. Then what am I? That is what you have to figure out. And you cannot do it alone. Her hand stayed on his, warm and solid, and Jake felt something inside him begin to thaw. Not all at once. Not a sudden transformation. But slowly, like ice melting in spring sunshine. One drop at a time. On the 3rd day, the storm broke and the sun came out, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. Jake went outside to check on the animals and found Claire in the barn, standing with one of the horses. The animal had injured its leg somehow during the storm, and she was wrapping it with cloth strips. Need help? He asked. Hold him steady while I tie this. Jake took the horse's halter and spoke softly to calm him. Claire worked quickly, her fingers sure and confident. When she finished, she stepped back and wiped her hands on her coat. That should do it. He needs to stay off it for a few days. I will make sure he does. They stood there in the dim barn light, close enough that Jake could see the frost on her eyelashes from the cold. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Claire," he started, but she put a finger to his lips. "Do not say anything you are not ready to mean." "What if I am ready? Then say it." Jake took a breath. "I am falling for you. I have been since that first night, and it terrifies me because I do not want to ruin this. I do not want to bring my darkness into your light. I have my own darkness, Jake, my own regrets, my own pain. But I learned something after my husband died. You cannot hide from the dark. You have to walk through it. And it is better to walk through it with someone beside you than alone. Is that what you want? Me beside you? Yes." The word hung between them, simple and powerful. Jake reached up and touched her face, his rough fingers gentle on her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just a moment. Then she opened them and looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise that if your past comes looking for you again, you will not run. You will face it here, with me and my father backing you up. Promise that you will trust us to stand with you." Jake thought about the men who had ambushed him, about all the ghosts that chased him across the territories. He thought about what it would mean to stop running, to plant his feet and say enough. It was terrifying. But, looking into Claire's green eyes, he knew it was also right. "I promise." She smiled then, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. She stretched up on her toes and kissed him, soft and quick, then pulled back with a slight blush on her cheeks. "Good. Now help me get fresh hay for these stalls." Just because we are having a moment does not mean the work stops. Jake laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. And as they worked together in the barn talking about nothing and everything, he felt something he had thought was lost forever. He felt home. But peace, Jake would soon learn, had to be fought for, and his fight was far from over. January brought a hard freeze and clear skies. Jake worked beside George and Claire, and slowly he became part of the rhythm of the ranch. The horses knew his voice now. The cattle came when he called. His hands, once smooth from months of riding, grew calloused again from honest labor. He and Claire grew closer, though they were careful not to rush things. They would sit together after supper, talking quietly while George pretended not to notice. They would work side by side during the day, and sometimes their hands would brush and they would share a look that needed no words. Jake carved her more wooden animals, a deer, a hawk, a wolf. She kept them on the windowsill in her room, and sometimes he would catch her looking at them with a soft expression that made his chest ache. But underneath the growing peace, he could not shake the feeling that something was coming. Some reckoning he had put off but not escaped. He started sleeping lighter, keeping his gun close. Watching the horizon more than he needed to, Claire noticed. "You are waiting for something, old habits or old enemies." Jake did not argue. She knew him too well now for lies. "If they come, I will handle it." "We will handle it," she corrected. "That was the promise, remember?" He nodded, but privately he hoped it would not come to that. He did not want Claire or George caught in the crossfire of his past. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant breaking his promise and facing his enemies alone. The men came on a cold morning in late January, 3 of them riding up the main trail like they owned it. Jake was in the barn when he heard the horses, and something in the sound made his blood run cold. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. George was already on the porch with his shotgun. Claire stood beside him, her face pale but determined. The 3 men reined in their horses and looked around the ranch with calculating eyes. The leader was tall and thin, with a scar running down his left cheek. Jake recognized him immediately. Pete Wilson, a bounty hunter out of Colorado. The kind of man who would track you across 3 states for the right price. "Morning, Wilson," said his voice friendly, but his eyes cold. "Looking for a man. Dark hair, about 6 feet tall." Answers to Jake Harrison. "You folks seen anyone like that?" George's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Can't say that we have." Wilson's smile did not reach his eyes.
That is funny.
"Because we tracked him here. Followed his trail from the canyon where he killed Johnny Reed. Been on him for weeks now." Jake stepped forward, his rifle held low but ready. "I am right here, Wilson." The bounty hunter turned to look at him, and his smile widened. "Well now, that makes things easier. You know why I am here? Reed's family hired you. Hired all of us. 5,000 for you, dead or alive. and son. We do not much care which it is." Jake felt Claire tense beside him, but she did not back down. George's shotgun came up a few inches. The two men with Wilson spread out slightly, their hands near their guns. "This does not have to involve them," Jake said quietly. "This is between us." "That is where you are wrong," Wilson said. "The moment they stood with you, they became part of it. Now you got two choices. Come quiet and we will leave them be. Or fight, and we take you anyway, but burn this place to the ground first. Your call." Jake's mind raced. 3 armed men against him, George and Claire. Even odds might have been manageable, but 3 to 3 when 2 of his side were people he loved? That was not a risk he could take. He started to lower his rifle to step forward and surrender, but Claire's voice stopped him. "You are not taking him." Wilson laughed. "Little lady, you do not have a say in this. I have this." She pulled a revolver from her coat pocket and aimed it at Wilson's chest. "And I know how to use it. My husband taught me before he died. I can put 3 shots in a playing card at 20 paces. You are a lot bigger than a playing card." The bounty hunter's smile faded. He looked at George, at Claire, at Jake. Reassessing. 3 armed targets was different than 1. And while he might win the fight, someone would die. Maybe him. That changed the calculation. "You are making a mistake," Wilson said. "We have made them before," George replied. "One more will not kill us. But it might kill you." The standoff held for a long moment. Jake could hear his heart pounding in his ears. His finger rested on the trigger, ready. If shooting started, he would go for Wilson first. The leader always died first. That was the rule. But then one of Wilson's men, a young kid who looked barely old enough to shave, said, "Pete, maybe we should think about this. 5,000 is not worth dying for." Wilson's jaw clenched, but Jake could see him doing the math. 3 determined people defending their home. Good cover, high ground. And maybe the kid was right. Maybe 5,000 was not worth the risk. "All right," Wilson said finally. "We will ride out." "But this is not over, Harrison. Reed's family wants blood, and they will get it, one way or another. You cannot hide here forever." "I am not hiding," Jake said. "I am standing still. There is a difference." Wilson stared at him for a moment longer, then wheeled his horse around. His men followed, and they rode back down the trail at a gallop. When they were out of sight, Jake finally let out the breath he had been holding. George lowered his shotgun. "They will be back, I know." Claire put her revolver away, but her hand was shaking. Jake reached out and took it, and she gripped his fingers hard. "We need to settle this," she said, "for good." "How?" Jake asked. "How do you settle something when the other side will not listen to reason? You go to them, you make them listen." George looked at his daughter. "That is asking for a death sentence." "No," Claire said, looking at Jake. "It is asking for truth." Johnny Reed drew first. Jake defended himself. "There were witnesses. If we can get those witnesses to come forward, if we can prove what really happened, maybe Reed's family will back down." "And if they will not," Jake asked, "then at least we tried. At least we can say we did everything possible before this becomes a war. Going to Kansas, facing Reed's family, asking them to listen when all they wanted was revenge. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal. But the alternative was living in fear, waiting for the next attack. And he had promised Claire he would not run, that he would face his past with her beside him. "All right," he said. "We go to Kansas. We find the witnesses, we tell the truth, and we see if that is enough." Claire smiled at him, proud and afraid at the same time. George just shook his head, but he did not argue. They went inside to make plans, to prepare for a journey that might save them or destroy them, but they would make it together, and somehow that made all the difference. Over the next 2 days, they'd prepared for the trip to Kansas. George would stay behind to watch the ranch. Jake and Claire would go together, riding east into territory that might well be hostile. It was not a perfect plan, but it was the only one they had. The morning they left, George pulled Jake aside while Claire was saddling the horses. "You bring her back safe," he said. "You understand me? Whatever happens with Reed's family, you bring my daughter home."
"I will. I swear it."
George studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. And, son, for what it is worth, I am glad you stayed. Claire is happier than I have seen her in years." "That makes 2 of us," Jake said. They rode out at dawn, heading east through a country that grew flatter and less wild with each passing mile. They traveled carefully, avoiding main roads, camping in hidden spots, At night, they would sit by small fires and talk about everything except what waited for them in Kansas. On the fourth night, with the stars bright overhead, Claire asked, "What will you do if this does not work, if Reed's family will not listen?" "I do not know," Jake admitted. "Run, maybe. Take you somewhere far away where no one knows my name." "I would go with you," she said quietly, "if it came to that. I would leave everything and go." Jake looked at her, this strong woman who had somehow decided he was worth saving. "You should not have to make that choice." "Maybe not, but I am making it anyway." She moved closer to him, leaning against his shoulder. "You asked me once what I needed, someone who understands darkness because they have been there. Well, I am learning what I need too. I need someone who will fight for what he loves instead of running from what he fears." "Are you that man, Jake?" He thought about it. About all the times he had run, all the times he had chosen solitude over connection. But sitting here with Claire against his shoulder, feeling her warmth and her trust, he knew the answer. "I am trying to be." Good enough for me. They reached Kansas a week later, riding into the small town where Johnny Reed had died. The place had not changed much. Main Street with a saloon, a general store, a livery stable, the same dusty buildings and suspicious faces. Jake and Claire hitched their horses outside the sheriff's office and went inside. The lawman looked up from his desk, and his eyes narrowed when he recognized Jake. "You got nerve coming back here, Harrison. I came to set the record straight about what happened with Reed. You shot him, in self-defense, and there were witnesses. Tom Parker saw the whole thing. So did Martha Green from the boarding house." Reed drew first. He was drunk and looking for a fight. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "That may be, but it does not matter much now. Reed's family wants blood, and they do not care about the details." "Then make them care," Claire said. "You are the law. You can prove what really happened." "And say I do? Say I get statements from Parker and Green. Put it all down official. You think that will change anything?" "Reed's brother does not care about justice. He cares about revenge." "So what?" Jake asked. "I just let him kill me to even the score? I am saying you might want to keep riding. Get far from here and do not come back." Jake felt Claire's hand on his arm, steadying him. "We are not leaving until we try. At least let us talk to the witnesses. Let them tell what they saw." The sheriff sighed. "All right. Parker runs the hardware store down the street. Green still runs the boarding house on 3rd. You want to talk to them, go ahead. But I am warning you, Reed's family has men watching the town. They know you are here by now." "Let them know," Jake said. "I am done hiding. They found Tom Parker first." He was a middle-aged man with honest eyes and calloused hands. When Jake explained why they had come, Parker nodded slowly. "I saw it all," he said. "Reed was drunk as a skunk, waving his gun around, saying how he was going to kill the next man who looked at him wrong. You tried to walk away, Harrison. I saw you try. But he would not let it go. He drew first, and you had no choice. I will swear to that in front of God and anyone else." "Would you swear it in front of Reed's family?" Parker hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "I will. What Reed did was wrong, and I will not let his brother kill a man for defending himself." They got a similar statement from Martha Green, an elderly woman with a steel spine and clear memory. She described the incident in detail, confirming everything Jake had said.
With both witnesses willing to testify, they went back to the sheriff.
"All right," the lawman said, writing down their statements.
"This makes it official. What happened was self-defense, pure and simple. I will send word to Reed's family. Maybe it will make a difference." Maybe it will not," Jake said, "but at least we tried." They took a room at the boarding house to wait. The next morning, Reed's brother arrived with 3 men. Jake watched from the window as they dismounted outside the sheriff's office. He recognized Pete Wilson among them, which meant the bounty hunter was working directly for the family now. "They are here," Jake said. Claire came to stand beside him. "Then we go down and face them. Claire, together, Jake." That was the promise. They walked down the stairs and out into the street. The morning sun was bright, and the town had gone quiet, people sensing trouble and making themselves scarce. Reed's brother stood in the middle of the street, his face hard with grief and anger. "Harrison," he called out. "This ends today." Jake stepped forward, keeping Claire slightly behind him. "It does not have to. The sheriff has statements from witnesses." "Your brother drew first." "I defended myself."
"It was not murder. You expect me to believe that?"
I expect you to read the statements.
"To talk to the people who were there. To use your head instead of your gun." Reed's brother laughed bitterly. "My brother is dead. That is all I need to know. And I am sorry for that, Jake said, meaning it. I am sorry he made the choice he did.
I am sorry it ended the way it ended, but I will not die for defending myself.
And I will not run anymore. Then you will die right here. Reed's hand moved toward his gun, and Jake's hand dropped to his own. Time seemed to slow. He could see Wilson and the other men starting to draw. Could see Claire stepping forward, her own gun coming up. Could see the sheriff bursting out of his office with a rifle. "Stop!" The voice rang out across the street, and everyone froze. An old man was walking toward them, his steps slow but steady. He looked like an older version of Johnny Reed, with the same eyes and the same stubborn jaw. "Pa?" Reed's brother said, confused. "Put the gun away, son." "But," I said, "put it away." The old man reached his son and put a hand on his arm. Then he turned to Jake. "You are Harrison?" "Yes, sir." "My boy Drew first?" "He did. I tried to walk away. He would not let me." The old man's face crumpled, and suddenly he looked every one of his years. "That sounds like Johnny. Always had more pride than sense. Always looking for a fight." He looked at his other son. "Your brother made his choice, and he paid for it. That is hard, but it is true. We do not murder men for defending themselves. We are not animals, Pa. He killed Johnny, and Johnny would have killed him if he had been slower. That is the way of it. That is the way it has always been." He turned back to Jake. "I am sorry my boys have caused you trouble. The bounty is withdrawn. You will not be hunted by us." Jake felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, sir." The old man nodded, then turned and walked away, his remaining son following reluctantly after him. Wilson and the other men holstered their guns and mounted up, riding out without a word. The street remained silent for a moment, then slowly people began emerging from buildings. The sheriff came over and clapped Jake on the shoulder. "Well done, son." "Took guts to face him like that." "Took truth," Jake said. "And good people willing to stand up for it." They stayed in town one more night, then started the long ride back to the ranch. As they traveled, Jake felt lighter than he had in years. The weight he had been carrying, the certainty that his past would eventually destroy him, had lifted. Not completely. There would always be ghosts. But for the first time, he believed he might be able to live with them. When they finally saw the Parker Ranch in the distance, Claire reined in her horse and looked at Jake. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we build something. A life. A future. Whatever we want it to be. And if more trouble comes, then we face it. Together." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. They rode the last mile side by side, and when they reached the house, George came out to meet them. His relief was obvious, and he pulled both of them into rough hugs. That night, they sat around the fire and told him everything that had happened. When they finished, George raised his glass. To facing things instead of running from them, and to finding family in unexpected places. They drank, and Jake looked at the two people across from him, this man who had taken him in, and this woman who had seen past his mistakes to the man he was trying to become. He thought about how close he had come to riding past this ranch that first night, how different his life would be if he had chosen solitude over connection. And he realized that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was not face down your enemies or overcome your fears. Sometimes the bravest thing was letting people in, allowing yourself to be seen. Choosing to stay even when running would be easier. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Both of you. You are family now," George said. "That is what family does." Jake looked at Claire, and she reached across and took his hand. Her green eyes held his, full of promise and possibility, and the quiet certainty that they had found something worth fighting for. He had come west looking for solitude, for silence, for a place to disappear. Instead, he had found purpose. He had found home. And most importantly, he had found someone whose eyes saw not the man he had been, but the man he was becoming. The cowboy had wanted solitude, but in the end, what he needed was love. And love, he was learning, changed everything.